Started recording. All right, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks so much for joining us this morning around the virtual water cooler to talk about The Internet Ruined My Life, the new sci-fi show that aired last night. I'm Diana Graber from Cyberwise, and the reason we're doing this is really twofold. You know, one of our missions at Cyberwise is to really help anyone from having their life ruined by the internet or social media or any of that stuff. And secondly, doing this work, I'm so lucky enough to get to know some of the nation's top experts in this realm, and 3 of them are here today, and I'd really like to thank you for being here. So I'd like to take a quick moment to let everyone introduce themselves, starting with my partner in this endeavor, Sue Chef. Sue and I were actually lucky enough to be asked by the Sci-Fi Channel to contribute short expert tips for the show. And one of hers that I really love is "There is no rewind online." So Sue, can you tell us a little bit, well, Sue, how did you come to be considered one of the nation's top online safety experts? And maybe give us a little bit of your background.
Well, actually, I fell into that role, and I'm not sure. I like to consider myself more of an advocate than an expert, though I guess I'm an expert too. And it's strictly basically by learning by all the mistakes that I had made over 15 years ago. I was actually one of the very first people that won the big $11.3 million internet defamation case. 11.3 million. It was a judgment, of course, not collectible, but at least I went to trial, and the jury did find, the damage that was done to me, and it's irreparable because there is no rewind online. Although Lady Justice cleared my name, the internet never says, "I'm sorry." You won't get an apology from Google, and that stuff is still out there. So you have to remember, before you do click online, that is public. It is never going away, and it can destroy you. At 40 years old, I nearly lost my career. My emotionally, I was destroyed, and it took me a very long time to get over it. And I think that's why it's so important for a show like this to show how real it is today. The internet is truly destroying lives.
Yeah, and hopefully we're going to help in our little way to have that stop happening out there.
Right.
So one of the people that's going to help us do that is Dr. Pam Rutledge. And Pam, I'm so happy to have you here. I know everything I know from Pam, who was one of my professors when I was studying, getting a master's in media psychology and social change. So Pam, could you take a moment to tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm a psychologist. I specialize in how people use and develop media. And one of my soapboxes is for us to figure out how to use technology in a very positive way, because there's an awful lot of people worrying about the bad side. And if you're only worrying about the bad side, then you're not equipping yourself to take advantage of the good side. So I'm really applying the lens of psychology to this kind of media use and helping individuals, corporations, as well as teaching. So it's a very exciting field. Great.
Thanks, Pam. And last but certainly not least is attorney Bradley Shear, who I was lucky enough to meet last year. And Bradley, he specializes in internet, tech, and privacy law, and has done a lot of good for a lot of people. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, Brad.
Sure, thanks for having me. I started my career back at the National Football League Players Association in the late 90s, and that's where I first learned about digital issues that may affect people. And literally over the past 6-7 years, these issues have literally exploded. I focus on, as you said, internet privacy issues. And one thing that I've done is, from an advocacy standpoint, there's a whole bunch of states, about 23 states, that have enacted laws and employers and schools from being able to demand access to your social media accounts. And I helped a lot of states actually draft the legislation, testified in favor of these laws. And that's one thing that I've tried to do to help people better protect their privacy and try to avoid some of the issues that some people are dealing with and some of the things that people have dealt with on these shows.
And we thank you so much for that good work, because you've helped a lot of people in that respect. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. And Sue, I'm going back to you. As the person who is no stranger from having your life almost ruined by the internet, what would you say to someone? What would you advise to someone who is in a similar situation to sort of repair themselves or recover from being hurt or defamed in some manner by the internet or on the internet?
Right. Well, like I said, I had to learn by default. I had to learn by crawling my way back. And one of the first things you have to remember is when it's happening to you, you cannot engage with the troll or the perpetrator. And I see so many times it's the very first thing you want to do is defend yourself. And as much as they're telling you that the sky is blue or the sky is red, you want to go out there and you want to tell them the sky is blue. And you can't do that. So as hard as it is, you have to step away and you have to start taking care of yourself. And most importantly is you have to tell someone. And whether you're a child, I mean, we preach this to our children all the time. Tell an adult, tell your parent. But I'm telling adults, if this is happening to, tell a friend. One thing I did is I stayed very private. I was so humiliated and so shamed. Really, you become shaming is very real. And I didn't tell anybody, and I lived with this inside me for a very long time, because you get to a point where I didn't want to share my name with anybody for fear that they would Google me. And once they Googled me, they'd see all that ugliness. So my number one tip to everybody out there is share your pain. Besides with the trolls, you don't engage with them. And when you share your pain, the one thing you have to tell that your friend or family member is, please don't go out there and engage with these trolls, because you will never win. But you have to open up with someone. You have to share your pain.
Those are really great tips. And, you know, sharing offline is often very important, and we forget how powerful that is as well.
You also have to remember, I mean, I've written about sharing online too. I mean, there's a lot, you know, the internet is you know, it can be a weapon, but it also can be a place where you can find a lot of great people too. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, you know, in a positive way too.
That's a great point, and it's a great throw to my next question to Pam. You know, it seemed like, you know, I love it because Pam's always talking about the positive ways to use the internet. And I was thinking about that last night, because it seemed like at some point, each of those targets, I never like to call people victims, but each of those targets had a moment of decision that could have let the situation go one way or another. And I don't know if that struck you as well, Pam, or if you want to address that question.
Well, sure. But I also want to talk about what Sue was saying about not engaging, because the whole point of these trolls, it's really a power play. And if you're playing into them, it's just like a bully. Think of it as a conflict resolution approach, where you don't want to empower someone to continue with bad behavior. So doing what Sue suggests, which is not engaging with the trolls, is exactly the right behavior, because that deflates them and that takes away the power. And at the same time, by engaging publicly with your pain, it allows people to support you. There'll be a huge amount of support that buries the trolls. And it buries the negativity and positivity. So that's a really important way of both getting social support and getting people to get some emotional comfort out of that pain, as well as to diffuse the troll situation. Now, I've forgotten the question.
No, that's okay, because that's a better answer than my question even was. And it reminds me a lot, you know, I work a lot with kids through cyber civics. And it's exactly what I tell them, you know, when you see something unkind online, post positive. We can drown out negativity, and it's so powerful, and it helps people so much when you do that. So,
and there's so many more positive people out there. And the other thing I would say, if anything happens, document it right away. Don't just tell somebody, document it right away. If something makes you upset, just document it. You can throw it away later if it turns out to be nothing. But if you've got this trail of documentation, then it validates your own anxiety and fear, because then when you do talk with someone, you're not just telling them and they're going, she's, you know, off her, you know, they're going, oh yeah, okay, I get that. Right. And that really is having that validation is very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, just to piggyback on that real fast, everyone says block and tell. I always say copy the evidence first, because, you know, sometimes once you block someone, it seals you off from seeing the evidence anymore. So you have to screenshot everything before you block them.
Okay, I want to get Brad in this conversation before they think it's ladies' night here in California. Ladies' Day. So, Brad, one of the things they mentioned last night is there is no federal laws to protect victims of cyber attacks. Is that true? I have never heard that before.
Well, the challenge is that there's no strong anti-cyber stalking statute out there. Something was just introduced earlier this week. Most states have some type of cyber stalking or cyber harassment or cyberbullying laws on the books. However, you have the issue of the First Amendment. And for example, last year there was a major Supreme Court case called the Alanis case, and it basically said that this gentleman who was harassing his ex-wife said a lot of very bad things online about her, sent her emojis on several different platforms, and basically his case was it came out saying, hey, look, he has a First Amendment right to say a lot of these things because he said basically he was play acting. So it's a very, very troubling challenge here. You have on one hand trying to protect people against those who make online threats versus saying, well, wait a minute, we have the First Amendment here. Someone has the right to say a lot of things online about other people, whether or not you agree to it or not. So
Brad, what's the difference between stalking and libel? You know, when you're saying something about someone that's sort of defames their character, you know, or their competencies or something. I mean, there's a difference between I hate you and, you know, you're a bad mother, for example.
Well, I mean, as far as stalking somebody, if someone keeps popping up everywhere you are online and comes at you through your email, through your Twitter account, on Facebook, through all these different platforms, then that might rise the occasion of a potential state cyber stalking violation. However, everything is facts determinative. I hate to sound like a lawyer, but it becomes very, very technical.
That's what you're Brad.
Unfortunately, sometimes I have to be very technical. And then as far as libel or slander, you have to take a look. Every state has a law that's slightly different, but there is a fine line. So, I mean, you have to be aware of what you're saying online and being very cognizant of the fact that what you're doing may have legal consequences.
And you bring up such a good point. I mean, like the whole idea is to not say these inflammatory things in the first place, which is tough because who of us has not seen a post or a tweet or a text that we want to respond to immediately in anger because it's kind of a human reflex. And Sue, what would you say to someone that's thinking that right now?
What I would say is get yourself a Moleskine book. I have tons of them here, okay? And when I get angry or upset, I jot them down because you have to pause. You have to stop, wait 24 hours. It's the same thing when you have a sensitive email that you're about to send. Whenever you see something online, a comment, a fake Facebook post like the gentleman last night, the chef last night, I mean, I would be angry too if I saw someone, you know, defaming or saying negative stuff about a restaurant that you're really passionate about. But you know what? You have to understand in today's cyber world, again, it's there forever. And when he put out that comment about the restaurant, these are the choices that you make. And you have to realize he was posting to someone in the state of Minnesota. He doesn't know her mental state. He doesn't know her. And he does have he does have the picture of his child publicly posted on his profile picture, which again, the key word there, as Brad will love, is public. All Facebook profile pictures are public. And when he posted that on her Facebook webpage or whatever it is, it became public. It became free game. And it was within seconds that someone, you know, copied it, manipulated it, and it was gone viral.
You know, I think one of the reasons that people make those kinds of mistakes is that there's this, even though we know cognitively that there's all these people out there, when someone upsets you, it feels like a very personal conversation, and you lose sight emotionally of the publicness, and you don't have that. You think you're in this conversation and you forget about that everyone else is watching. Mm-hmm. So, but you know, I
have these books, I have tabs. I mean, I do. Whenever I get angry, Brad, I've been with Brad before. I mean, I do. We love using our 4-letter words too. Use profanity, privately,
right?
Privately, not online,
right?
Because it will come back to haunt you. Yeah. Your words will come back to haunt you.
You know, that's such a great point. But I wanted to ask, and I don't know who to ask this of, but maybe you, Pam, because one thing I was curious about is, like, I noticed that one of the gentlemen last night used his picture with his child as his Facebook profile. And because I work with kids and I hear so much from kids that they really hate it when their parents put them online. They do. That's what I hear. And I hear this from, you know, preteens and teens. What do you think about a parent using their child's picture as part of their profile?
Well, I think it's not a good idea. And I was going to say there were two things that this fellow last night, the chef, could have done completely differently and achieved his end. One is, first of all, that because of this publicness, you shouldn't put your kids' pictures on on Facebook. And I'm actually very careful about my privacy settings, not because of what I share, because I don't share very much on Facebook, but because I have friends who post pictures of their kids. And so I don't want to give the public access to my friends.
We need
so
a blip
I have
there, but you're back.
Oops.
Yeah.
Okay, am I back? Okay, so there's like too much talking. Take her out. The second is that there were ways of posting in a positive way about the restaurant. He could have gone to the restaurant site and said, a lot of responses here are people who've never eaten at this restaurant. This chef is amazing. Don't just assume this is a bad restaurant because of some of these posts, because these are posts worrying about a specific thing. So he could have done something that a lot of people would have found very credible, would have achieved his goal in a much more positive way. But you're right. Do not put pictures of your kids out in the public. There were pictures of, who was it? Jessica Simpson, who was posting pictures of her daughter sort of, posing like a little model. And I'm going, just because you made your money out of your looks, don't put your kid in a position where they're an object of attention.
All right. So Brad, go ahead. I have a question.
One quick thing. Sorry. From a legal perspective, I believe it's in France and some other European countries, there's potentially some legal liability for parents who post photos of their children. So that's just another thing to think about, that down the road, maybe your child might have a legal claim against you. So I agree with Pam, just be very careful and limit the postings.
Yeah, that's a great tip right there. So Brad, one of the most interesting stories I thought last night was the one about the couple that were detained by Homeland Security for a tweet that I guess the young man sent out, and the trouble that authorities have deciphering between cultural slang and sarcasm. Can you address that?
Sure. I mean, it comes down to you have these very powerful programs that just collect a ton of different data, and the programs can't always decipher what slang is, what someone meant. And this is not just some type of isolated case. What happened to those two tourists? It was something that happened several weeks ago to a student from Egypt who had sent something out, I believe it was on Facebook, about Donald Trump, and he ended up getting deported. You've had several instances around the world. It's not just in the United States. It's around the world where countries are really stepping up their social media monitoring. And that's why whatever you post to your name, you have to be very careful. And that's why a lot of times with clients and with other people, I say, you know what, if you have something to say, you should do what our founding fathers did with Federalist Papers. Post it anonymously and do it in a manner that will protect your privacy and your safety and security.
That's a really good tip. However, what do you think about these anonymous networks? I mean, do you feel that that's a good place for people to air grievances or thoughts that they may not want to say publicly attached to themselves?
I think there's pros and cons for it, just like anything else. If you have something to say that's maybe politically not correct, then obviously that's a great place to post them, because you just don't know how the things that you're saying now may be used against you 5, 10, 15 years down the road. So I'm a big fan of privacy, and the stronger the privacy protections, usually the better. However, there are law enforcement issues out there which are right now being decided in Congress. And there's a lot of talk about how far privacy should go. So I think there's a continuing dialogue, and we just have to have a much broader conversation on how to deal with these issues in the future.
And I think the flip side of that is that people worry that if people are online anonymously, that they misbehave more, that somehow that protecting their privacy also encourages lack of accountability. So I think that that's a fear that people have. I don't think it's necessarily a valid fear, because I think people perform pretty true to self. And the research bears that out. But I think you get people fighting those things that you're trying to do because of that anxiety.
So along those lines, I was going to ask each of you, because I think we all watched the show last night, but watching that show, what was your one big takeaway, something that really made you stop and think? And I'll start with you, Sue. What was your takeaway from last night?
I think the biggest takeaway is that people have to understand that conduct today is just as important as content. In other words, your conduct, like we used to talk about so much about what you post online is important, but you have to remember your social behavior online is crucial today, because it was the behavior of these people, even from last week's show, that gets them in trouble just as much as the content.
Very good point. And Pam, what would you say your big takeaway is from last night?
Well, I think that's right. That first of all, there is no line between on and offline. This is a world that we live in. And so just like you're supposed to have good manners offline, you need to take that online and sort of the golden rule, or, what grandma will see, or however you want to phrase that to yourself. And the other thing is that much of social media is seen out of context. So someone will see a post or a thread on Twitter or something that offends them, and they have no idea what the entire conversation was going with that. It could have been something in jest. It could have been something about
I thought that was interesting last night, the Facebook post, and how the person who started the whole conversation was able to take down what she had originally said. I didn't know you could do that on Facebook.
Well, yeah, if you posted it, you can remove it.
Yeah, and so all people saw were his responses, and it was taken out of context. I thought that was really unfortunate.
Well, that's why yes, I agree.
Right.
You have to take snapshots, and you have to make sure
pictures.
You have the digital evidence.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to remember. For me, my takeaway was it was such an interesting evening for me, because I had just come from a day working with children at a school in Pasadena, and we had talked about scenarios like these, but kid scenarios that have happened to other children about their age, and they read them on paper, and then they debated them in groups, and they talked about how they would do it differently. And I was really impressed, first of all, at how wise children are. But secondly, I think how lucky they are that they could practice this, with their peers offline first. So hopefully they won't be like us, that were thrown to the wolves and make mistakes that we regret later. So I felt like, wow, it was a really great way to spend the day. So I have to get on my soapbox for cyber civics here and there. All right. So I would like to also take a moment and ask each of you to share an example of something positive that you viewed on social media. And this time I'm going to start with you, Brad.
Sure. Could you repeat the question? It was hard to hear.
Talk a little bit about, because I need to detox from the negativity from last night. So I want to talk about something positive that you viewed online. Maybe somebody that's come out of a situation that could have gone the other way. I'm sure you've seen plenty of those in your work. If you could share.
Sure. I mean, I've had some clients who have, who literally have been tortured online, tormented. And as what was said earlier, I believe it was by Pam, about, and I think Sue mentioned it also, sometimes it's best just to ignore the taunts, ignore what's going on, and just try to go along the adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Because I really think that adage really goes a long way in this world, because once you start to engage, and once you start to go back and forth, and the name calling and things start to get much more heightened, that's when there's the potential for major legal issues to occur. So my best piece of advice on a lot of these issues is to literally ignore them until they become a bigger problem. And if and when they do, then to reach out to a lawyer, reach out to law enforcement. Even though that might not always be the best solution, sometimes you really do need to take that extra step.
Very good advice. And how about you, Sue? I know that you've seen plenty of positivity. I've seen some of it come your way, which has been really lovely. Can you share some examples?
Well,
okay,
I think
I'm going to give you a tip of the example. I love it. It has to do with your dog.
How social media transcends grief. Well, like I just said earlier, I think social media, is a double-edged sword. But I think what I really want to spotlight on is when bad things happen to good people. I've seen so many of them create really great stuff from it. For example, like the I Can Help team, who took that, school teacher that someone made that horrible Facebook page about, and then they started this campaign, and that's just, blossomed into this I Can Help, where they're out there, deleting negativity online. And now we have, Happy Help Wednesday. And then every Wednesday we go out there and we try to find at least one person that's having a bad day, and you just send them, whether it's a cyber hug or a smiley face. And I think that's what I've really have delighted in seeing from negative online is what the people are doing with the bad stuff that has happened is created, whether you have Spark Kindness, Ripple Kindness, you have I Can Help You, all these little groups that have just now cultivated our internet and creating kindness online, which I think is just really great. I mean, we wouldn't have had this if we didn't have trolls, if we didn't have mean people. So we have a lot of kindness groups out there, and then we had like the Take No Bullies campaign from Smart Sign. We have a lot of big corporations now. Even Coca-Cola got in on it, I think last year with the Super Bowl on their ad about kindness. I think it's really great that a lot of corporations and small groups, schools are getting into kindness clubs. I think that's a really positive thing that's come out of the negative bullying, online harassment.
It makes me think of when I worked with kids on doing a cyberbullying lesson last year. One of the little sixth graders said, "Mrs. Graber, sometimes a cyberbully just needs a hug."
Right. But it's really shined a light on how much good there is. And I think online, offline and online. But
yeah, there truly is. And I'm going to go to Pam now, who's the professor of positivity.
Well, I mean, there are an awful lot of instances that we forget about when we're worrying about cyberbullying, of how the internet has really supported people. I mean, if you think about the Zuckerbergs posting about a miscarriage, or if you think about people even finding groups that share an interest that they thought they were, they loved Twilight, and so they found a group of people who also loved it, and it normalizes their feelings about, either a loss, or it supports them in something they like, and it makes them feel more whole, so that they take that back offline and behave better. I mean, those things are transferable, and that social support that we get online really makes a difference in how we behave offline. Even a silly cat video, if you so much as crack a smile, your body chemistry changes, and the next person you see, you're just going to be nicer to.
Hey, we're getting close to our ending time, but we do have a question for somebody, and it looks like a Brad question, so I'm going to focus this to you, Brad. And the question is regarding anonymity. Mm-hmm. It is important we teach youth that there's no such thing as absolute anonymity. I hope I'm saying that right. Through apps and social media. Only levels of confidentiality. Knowing they can get caught may diminish how cavalier they are on those platforms. Would you agree or disagree, and why?
Well, I think you have to be careful, because obviously some apps are more private than others, and like, for example, what you post on with Facebook through the app versus what you might use, for example, Telegram. There are different types of apps that you can utilize for different types of circumstances. So if I was to say no app is fully anonymous and fully secure, I don't like to deal in absolutes, but I agree that depending upon what the app is, what the policy, that was just a big issue the last couple of days with WhatsApp, because obviously you have DOJ and law enforcement who want to have access to what everyone is saying. They don't want to have to go dark. So there are a lot of issues that are very troubling out there. However, they're very challenging from a legal perspective as far as how much information should be accessible, because it really gets complicated when you start talking about encryption keys and levels of anonymity out there. So I agree that you just have to be careful with what you're posting, and no app is, or most apps are not truly anonymous.
Right. I always think in terms of kids, because I spend so much time working with them, but I've seen so many instances of unfortunate situations on anonymous apps with children, and when they're brought to the classroom and we talk about it, kids always know who it is. I mean, kids think they're anonymous, but their friends are smart. Their friends know. And I wish we had more time, because I have cute little stories of kids who have crushes and say something about something else anonymous, and the next week the whole class knows. So it's a horrible way to find out that there is no anonymity online.
Right. Well, your personality shows in your voice.
Does. So, all right. In our last minute, I would like everyone to give one word to wrap up on one takeaway that you hope everyone leaves today with. And Sue, you look nervous, so I'll start with Pam.
I guess the is think about how you'd behave online
Sue?
and offline as the same place.
I want people to understand if they're the biggest thing people always ask me is what do I do if I'm being attacked online? Of course, everyone knows don't engage. But another little tip that people don't realize is that you can report the troll to the site provider. And if you read the terms of service or code of conduct, there's usually provisions there that don't allow harassment. So politely write the site provider, copy and paste the comments, and it usually violates their code of conduct, and they will typically swiftly remove it for you.
That's a great tip. And Brad, what's your final takeaway today?
Privacy. Limit the personal details and information you post online. The less is more.
Very good. And my final takeaway is thank you for joining us. And I hope you all, actually, I want to say post positive. If you do one thing today, put something nice out there. We sure need it, right? So, and don't talk about politics on your Facebook page.
There you go.
Takeaway. All right. So, what I want to do is really invite everyone. We're going to try to do this every week at this time to talk about the previous night's show. And we're really excited. Next week, late breaking news, we have two great guests. Richard Geary is the founder of the nonprofit organization, the Institute for Responsible Online and Cell Phone Communication. And Mary Cahill, great writer, by the way, is the founder of Yearsphere and a nationally recognized speaker on these issues. So, but I really want to thank our three guests today. I feel very lucky to spend even half an hour with you all three. And it's been really great. And I hope that we've helped some people get some tips and they can watch this later if they're bored. It's going to be online soon. So thank you all so much. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
It's been great to be here. Bye.
You just
I don't know how to get out.